What's good, y'all? It's a new week of Locked On Mariners, and as we all know, second base has been a massive problem area for this team for the last few years, and they thought they finally found their solution to that problem in Jorge Polanco this winter, but that, for whatever reason, just hasn't worked out whatsoever. So I know we have some Ryan Bliss fans that listen to the show, but they might have to go outside the organization to figure that out, and the answer might reside on the Cubs roster. So Colby and I are going to talk about that and then answer some of your questions for Mailbag Monday.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Monday, July 1st, 2024. This is Ty and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome to Mailbag Monday, the show where we answer your Mariners questions. Before we get into this week's batch, shout out to our title sponsor today, Tax Network USA. Did you know that it's never too late to resolve your tax issues with the IRS? Don't wait. Reduce your tax debt and get help from a team of licensed tax professionals by calling 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description, and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial. So we're going to answer some of your questions a little later on in the show, but we're actually going to start here with some. It's not news. It's not even a report, even though it's been kind of framed as that. It's just speculation from Jon Morosi, who, of course, had a really bad winter this past winter with the Shohei Ohtani stuff and even some of the Mariners-related things that he talked about that didn't ever even come close to coming to the light. But he was on MLB Network today and talked about the Cubs and talked specifically about second baseman Nico Hoerner and said the Mariners could be a team that's interested in Hoerner. That's a lot different than, again, the way it's been framed on social media today, specifically from people on the Cubs side of things. The first time I saw anything about it, I saw someone from the Cubs sphere saying, oh, the Mariners and Cubs have talked about Nico Hoerner. They've talked about a trade involving Hoerner, and that's not at all what Morosi said today on MLB Network. But this is an opportunity to talk about a player that we haven't really talked about much, and on the surface makes some sense for the Mariners. And obviously it's also a better topic to talk about than, for the millionth time talking about, how bad this offense is and how are they going to fix it. Well, Hoerner could actually maybe be part of that solution, even though that he's pretty much hovering around a league average WRC plus right now. But relative to what the Mariners are rolling out 1 through 9 at the moment, a league average bat would help. He's also an elite second base defender, really good base runner, and the Mariners also need that. They obviously need offensive production first and foremost, but they also need to get better defensively, and they need to get better on the base pass. They need to get more athletic. Hoerner would help them in all of those departments. He still has by the deadline, we'll have a little under 2.5 years left of club control. He's making $11.5 million this year, which of course will be prorated, cut a little more than half by the time you would theoretically acquire him. Then he's making $11.5 million next year as well, and then $12 million in 2026. It's kind of an interesting situation here, though, with the Cubs specifically, because they've kind of been in win now mode. Obviously, they went big and signed Dansby Swanson a couple of off seasons ago. They brought back Cody Bellinger this past off season. So I would think that if the Cubs were entertaining trading Hoerner, that they would prefer players that are relatively close to the majors, if not already ready for a taste of Major League Baseball. So that to me would potentially put guys like Tyler Locklear, Dom Canzone, Ryan Bliss, etc. in play here. What do you think, Colby?
Yeah, Hoerner, first and foremost, is a very good player. Is he like the perfect player? No, if he was, he wouldn't be available. But he is a guy who plays elite defense. He is a very good base runner. He stole 40 bags last year. He's also a guy who doesn't strike out. He doesn't swing and miss. Like that is, and when I don't say like he doesn't, when I say that, I don't mean like, oh yeah, he's like league average strikeout guy. He doesn't strike out. Like, no, like He is 98th percentile in strikeout percentage this year. He's only striking out 11% of his at bats. He's only swinging and missing 13%. Of the time. And you even look at his chase rates, he'll expand the zone, but he's so good at making consistent contact. And sometimes that's all we really need from the hitter at the plate. We saw it this weekend. Sometimes you just need contact and you can score runs. So Hoerner gives that to you in spades. He's a really good base runner. He's an elite defender at second base. Can even play a little shortstop. I mean, you don't really want him to. It's not the best arm in the world, but he can play a great second base. The money, that's not really a concern of mine. I think that the Cubs have deep enough pockets that they would entertain a contract swap of maybe Jorge Polanco. Yeah. And then obviously you'd have to add to that to get them to eat some money, blah, blah, blah. But
him and Polanco are pretty much making the same amount of money. So that would be, as far as just the rest of 2024 goes, like you would essentially just be swapping the exact same dollar figure there.
Right. And so, so the money thing, I don't think that's going to be an issue. So if you're like, oh, the Mariners aren't going to pay $11 million for another second baseman, I don't think they're going to have to. I think Polanco could be involved in this deal. I think Ty France could be involved in a deal. Like the Mariners have ways to make that money not an issue. And I don't think the money is going to be an issue, for any player that they could reasonably acquire this summer, but not a guy, especially not a guy making $6 million for the rest of the year. They'll figure that out. Yeah. Less than that actually, but yeah, Hoerner is interesting. The Cubs are interesting. We talked about them on one of our shows last week. I don't know if it was the Patreon show or here.
I think it was CTZ. Yeah.
Right. And we talked about like, hey, they might be a sneaky. Could they trade Cody Bellinger? Could they trade Seiya Suzuki? Could they trade, Ian Happ? They have Pete Crow Armstrong coming up. They got to open up a room in the outfield. So maybe we just missed, we talked about the wrong guy. Nico Hoerner makes a lot of sense. He's very, well, I don't say very because he chases, but CTZ, he puts the ball in play. He knows what he does well. And so I think that he would be a fine addition. I think the way I would look at it is that Hoerner can absolutely be the best player that you add at this deadline. He can't be the best bat that you add at the deadline though. Yeah. And there is a difference there. So, adding a 4-win player, kind of regardless of how he does it, if you can afford it, if the cost makes sense, you should probably go ahead and do that because 4-win players don't grow on trees. So I think Hoerner is, I would be perfectly happy if they brought in Hoerner. The price, for 2.5 years of a 4-win player, it's going to cost you something, but it's not going to cost you Colt Emerson. It might, maybe it costs you Harry Ford, or maybe it costs you Cole Young, or maybe it costs you, Farmello, or maybe there is something where it's, hey, well, we like Dominic Canzone, or we like Tyler Locklear, or we like Ryan Bliss. Those guys are close to the big leagues, or they're in the big leagues. They could help us really soon. And so maybe instead of, it's more like, hey, how about you just give us Aiden Smith, Ty Pete, and then Ryan Bliss or whatever. So we get one guy who can kind of help us now, and then we get a couple of lottery tickets who can really explode over the next couple of years. So I do think that there's a possibility here that if there was a deal that would be reached, the Mariners could afford Hoerner in a way that wouldn't prevent them from going out and getting a better bat, like a Vlad Jr. or Luis Robert or Isaac Paredes. Like, I think they can still go get the bat that they need, but you shouldn't discount Hoerner just because he's not, the elite hitter that you want added to this lineup. You can do both.
Yeah.
Go get Vlad Jr. and Nico Hoerner. You can do both.
Yeah, you need to get better in other areas of your roster as well. Because at the very least, the problem with this roster at the moment is not just that they're not hitting. It's that some of the guys who are not hitting don't even offer you anything else of value in other areas of their game. Right? They're just a complete black hole across the board. Right? At the very least, with Hoerner, even though that he's just a league average bat, which again is better than quite a few of the guys that you're running out in your lineup at the moment, he's an elite defender. He's a great base runner. He gives you value in other areas of the game. That's what's really important here. And yeah, I think it's going to cost you something nice, but it's not going to cost you anything that should prevent you from going out and getting a Vlad Jr. or a Luis Robert, or, maybe just a couple of other like solid 120 WRC plus bats. Right. Mm-hmm. So Hoerner would be a really nice addition. Again, that helps you in a variety of ways. I'm totally on board with that. unless, the cost just gets to an extreme.
We're talking
place.
Colt Emerson, or we're talking Harry Ford and Cole Young, then you're out. That's fine.
I think the Mariners and the Cubs actually line up pretty well. I think Ryan Bliss would make a lot of sense here in this deal. One, to kind of reset their timeline at second base. He's not going to be the headliner, but I think he could be a legitimate piece of it.
Piece.
Yeah, I think he could be a legitimate piece of a Hoerner deal for the Cubs that they would really like and actually put quite a bit of value in. So I think this could actually work. I think there's a lot of different avenues that both of these teams could go down where Nico Hoerner ends up being a Seattle Mariner. And again, I think he would help quite a bit for what this roster really needs right now.
I would classify it as highly unlikely, but yeah, he makes sense.
All right, we're going to answer some of your questions here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks and once again, Tax Network USA. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. And even though the finals are over, the hoops action doesn't stop on PrizePicks. Women's basketball is still heating up with stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves alongside greats like Breanna Stewart and Asia Wilson. You can win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's promo code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Here on Locked On Mariners, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news for your team, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs. It's year-round. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. With over 14 years of experience and an A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000. That's 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. See the link in this episode description. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. The Mariners are off today, thank the heavens. But they're back at it tomorrow against the Baltimore Orioles. And if you dare, you can catch all the action on the Mariners' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. So now we're going to get into your questions here on Mailbag Monday. And we're going to kick things off with a question from Mark, who wants to know, what do you truly think the Mariners need to, quote unquote, fix this offensive problem? Feels like the number of impact bats needed has swelled to 3. I think it's always been 3. Now, the question is, you might add 3 position players, but are they all actually going to be bats in the true sense of the term? One of them, maybe 2 of them, ends up being more like defense first, which, again, you need some of that. You need to get better defensively. You need to get more athletic on your roster, on top of, obviously, the biggest issue here, which is the lack of offensive production. You need to be able to produce more offensively. So what fixes this offense? I mean, we have to start with Julio. We have to. Julio, if he figures it out, would be more impactful than anyone you could realistically acquire at the deadline. More impactful than Vlad Jr., more impactful than Luis Robert, more impactful than Pete Alonso, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Have to get Julio going. Have to just get the core in general going, right? JP has to be better. Cal has to be more consistent. At least Cal has produced, at times. He's obviously come through with some huge home runs, some huge hits in general. Like, I don't want to lay into Cal as much as, JP and Julio. I don't think he certainly fits in that same box as those guys, but he's been pretty streaky this year. So those guys have to be better. That's what's ultimately going to fix the offense. Nothing else, really. I look at the trade deadline as a means to manage what the issue is. to cover up some of the flaws of this offense. But you are absent of elite level production from the face of your franchise at the moment. And you're not even getting anything close to that. You're not even getting league average production out of him at the moment, which is a massive, massive, massive problem. And JP is obviously significantly regressed from what he was giving you last year. And just the top of your lineup in general is just not getting the job done right now. You look at that first Miami game on the road trip, the 8 and 9 hole hitters get on board, no one out. JP then strikes out. I forget what Rojas did. He was the 2-hole hitter that night, I believe. And then Julio grounded out or whatever. They weren't able to convert, basically. That's the point, right? The top of your order has to be better. We're seeing that portion of your lineup, which has to be the driving force of this thing right now, consistently fail.
Yeah. The bottom of the order has actually been fine. Like you're totally getting enough from Rayleigh. You're even getting enough from Canzone. It's hideous to watch, but when you use Canzone against righties, he's fine. Like
isn't he running like a 120 WRC plus or something?
Something like that. He's fine. You should still look to upgrade there, but he's fine. Like he's been fine. Rayleigh's been probably your most consistent hitter from start to finish. Josh Rojas has been totally fine. You've gotten pretty good contributions from role players like Tyler Locklear and Ryan Bliss and Victor Robles. Like you've gotten the contribution. So bottom of the order is fine. It's the top of the order. It's the top. Sometimes, we try and even you want to say, okay, take Cal out of it. And it's like, oh, JP's having a 99 WRC plus. If anything, last year's the outlier. And this is just who he is. Like, okay, fine. If JP's hitting 6th, he's fine. Mm-hmm. He's hitting leadoff. If JP's going to hit leadoff, he has to be better, right? Than league average. He has to. That's the guy who's getting the most at bats. The guy who's getting the second most at bats on this team, he's also below league average, and it's Julio. Julio has to get to his pull side. Like flaring singles into right field is fine, whatever. There's certainly a time and a place to do it, but he's getting middle and fastballs and he's pushing them out to right field.
He's a full 9% lower from his career average in pull rate right now.
Right. He is getting beat bad, and that's a problem. Cal Raleigh's not consistent enough, which is going to be part of his game, so it's fine. So even if you want to say like, oh, well, Cal and JP have been good enough, like, okay, fine. You can't say that about Julio. You can't say that about Polanco. You can't say that about Garver. And those are the 3 guys that are supposed to be the 125, 130, 140 WRC plus guys in this lineup.
Yep.
They're not getting it done. And it starts and ends with Julio not getting it done. This is basic. It's easy to say. It's something we can all agree on. Julio Rodriguez has not been good this year, and he has to be better. And even if the Mariners go out and they acquire 3 bats, and like one of them is like Julio level, and the other 2 are like solid role players, if Julio doesn't figure it out, you're still 2 bats short in this lineup from being a like legitimate 1 through 9. So at the end of the day, there is no fix to like Julio's problems from outside the organization. Julio has to decide that he needs to make the adjustment, and he has to figure out how to do it, because Luis Robert Jr. is not coming in to save the Seattle Mariners if Julio is a sub 100 WRC plus guy the rest of the way. Not going to happen. It's Julio. Like, stop overlooking what's the problem with the offense. It's Julio. It is Julio Rodriguez, the $200 million guy, the guy that you banked on, rightfully so, by the way.
Right. Well,
he's failing.
It's not like you're baking on him to do anything that he hasn't done before.
Julio has to be better, period. And even if Julio is better, you're still 3 bats short. And I think you always were 3 bats short. The unfortunate thing is that maybe if Julio took another step forward, which wasn't going to be something that was outrageous to ask, maybe if Cal took another step forward, which again, that's not outrageous to expect that he would do that, then maybe you only need 1.5, 2 bats. But they didn't. So now you need 3.
Next question here from Kyle. What do you think about, instead of getting bats at the deadline, we should just lean really heavy more into pitching, strengthen the staff, since we won't be able to fix this lineup in one deadline. We only have so much ammo and limited time to make additions. How does that help you score runs?
You can't win games runs. 0 to -1.
You still have to score runs, and you need some offensive help of some kind, right? And again, It doesn't have to be Vlad Jr., Luis Robert, Pete Alonso, whatever. It'd be nice if they got one of those guys. But even if it's just a couple of WRC, 120 WRC plus bats, 115 WRC plus bats that are, on expiring deals that are going to be free agent, Christian Walker, Mark Canha, etc. Like, even if it's a couple of those guys, that significantly helps relative to what else you're running out there right now offensively.
Yeah. If you can prevent more runs, that's fine, but you have to score more runs too. Like, you have to score more runs. So what's more likely? You're going to win more 4-3 games, or you're going to win more 1-0 games, right? So like your pitching can only be so good. And by the way, not for nothing, pitching more expensive to acquire than hitting at the deadline.
The Mariners have scored 5 or more runs in 29 out of 86 games this year. So that's 33.7%. So in other words, 2/3 of the time, Mariners pitchers have been required to have a quality outing in order for the team to win.
3 runs or less.
Yep.
That's a lot to ask over 162 games.
Yeah.
So like, would it be the worst thing that, like, if one of their significant trades, instead of getting that Mark Canha, they go get the Paul Sewald or whatever? No, you could sell me on that. Fine.
Yeah.
Like, cool. But you can't just go like, screw the offense. It's going to suck no matter what. It's never going to be great no matter what, but you need it to be average. An average offense with this pitching staff is going to win a lot of games.
Yeah. Think about how many games they've lost by just a couple of runs. And think about how many games the Mariners have had opportunities, like yesterday, plenty of opportunities where they've had traffic on the base pass and all they needed was to make contact. And they didn't. They struck out 2 times in a row, or they struck out to create the second out, and then it was a pop-up, or it was a ground out, or what have you. Right. How many times have they had runners in scoring position with 1 or fewer outs, and they haven't been able to convert just because they weren't even able to put the ball in play? All right. So we're going to answer more of your questions in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. I know I'm saying the obvious here, but I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, unfortunately, we get fewer games. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon, that's LOCKDON, and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Once again, you can catch the M's and the Orioles tomorrow and all the way through Thursday on the Mariners hometown broadcast of SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. All right, let's get back into your questions here. Junior Vela, apologies for not being able to pronounce your name right. Outside of the obvious answers, Colt Emerson, Young, Harry Ford, Las Montes, and Felon Celestin, who is a Mariners prospect do you think another team could potentially value more than what you would expect? I think Michael Arroyo, because he started to hit for power. So I think that's answered quite a few questions around him, where I think I've talked about this before. I definitely talked about it on the Patreon. I don't know if I've talked about this before on Locked On, but I kind of viewed him in a similar light to how we viewed Gabriel Gonzalez before he was traded in the Polanco deal this winter, where it's like, yeah, he can help you get a guy like that, a guy like Jorge Polanco, but you're also going to have to throw more in on top of him. But maybe a team views Arroyo in a similar light to how a team would view Johnny Farmelo and Las Montes, and kind of like, he's not Harry Ford, he's not Cole Young, he's not Colt Emerson, but he's firmly in that second group of guys.
He might be a year from now. Like, if he continues to produce like he has been.
Right.
He just made the jump to high A, and he's looked totally fine at high A.
Yeah.
It seems pretty likely at this stage he's going to be able to play either second base or third base. There's very little risk that he's got to move to the outfield anytime soon. And so, yeah, he's, pretty good athlete, pretty good solid hitter, and now he's developing into power, which has kind of always been the profile. He's going to make contact, he's going to hit doubles, he's going to hit line drives. If he can turn into some power, then he makes a lot of sense as a third baseman. And he's starting to get there. And I think he's 20 years old, if I'm remembering correctly. It might be 19. Like, he's still young. He's not 24 years old, just now figuring this out. So Arroyo to me is probably the guy that has more value than people think. I'd also throw Michael Morales into that mix. He has just been promoted to AA. He was a overslot third round pick a few years ago. He kind of stagnated at Modesto for a couple of years, but this year he took a big step forward. The velocity's up a little bit. The stuff is just a little bit crisper. He's always been a good athlete, repeats his delivery well. I think somebody will look at Michael Morales and be like, hey, that's a guy who could be in my rotation in a year. And could be like, get big league hitters out in a year. And is he like a mid-rotation guy? Probably not. But how valuable is it to have 6 years of a major league starting pitcher? Kind of regardless of, like, if you think that he can go 5-6 innings for the next 4 or 5 years for you and consistently help you win games, that's going to be valuable. So I think Morales is a guy kind of further down the ranks a little bit, but I think in terms of like the top 10, I think Arroyo is probably the guy that people are sleeping on in terms of what potential value he could bring or what he can account for in a trade.
Next question here from D. Panky. How big of a factor do you think both the Astros' schedule of playing 39 games with only 2 days off from August 16th through September 25th and their lack of prospect capital to trade will be going forward? I mean, pitching is the hottest commodity. It's the most expensive commodity in baseball, no matter what the context of the market is, no matter what the context of, you know, how many playoff spots there are. That will never change. Starting pitching is always going to be the most expensive, the most sought after commodity in the sport. And that's what the Astros most need right now because of all the injuries they've suffered in that rotation. With how rough that farm system is, they're not going to be able to swim in deep waters for starting pitching.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I mean, they still might be able to go get
maybe Jack Flaherty.
Maybe, but that's, I mean, they're going to have to kind of empty what's left of their farm system to get that done, which, I mean, they could, but that's one guy. They probably need 3 starters. And right now they're kind of hoping that Lance McCullers Jr. comes back at some point this year. And it's like, okay, and what if he does? What if he doesn't? Like, I think the Astros, I think there's a lot of focus on the Astros the last 10 games and kind of ignoring the previous 75 that they played where they were terrible and they couldn't pitch. And now people are just kind of like, oh my God, they've made up so much ground in such a short amount of time. They're back. And it's like, are they? Are they just in a hot streak right now? Like,
right. It just feels worse. It feels worse because it coincides with arguably the worst run of the Mariners season so far.
Right. It's the worst run since the first 12 games of the season.
Yeah.
Like, they played really solid ball for 2 months, and now the last 2 weeks have been bad.
Yeah.
And the Astros have happened to be really good in that 2 months span. So, their schedule, their limited options to go out and make their team better, I think those are going to be a factor. Is it enough to, for me to completely write them off? No, but then again, I don't think Ty or I were writing them off when they were 10 games back a couple weeks ago. Like, even we were like, yeah, we're not calling the Astros dead yet. No. So this is why we talked about that buffer being so important, right? It wasn't important to maintain it because we knew they weren't going to maintain it because we knew that there was going to be a stretch like this for the Astros. We knew there was going to be a stretch like this for Seattle. That's why the buffer is important. That's why it was. That's why you still have it, right? So, I think the Astros and their schedule, whereas Seattle pretty much gets a day off every week in September, I do think that will factor in a little bit here, but ultimately Seattle still has to go out and get better. Because the Astros offense is good and it can carry them for a while. So the Mariners have to go out, they have to make their team better. And maybe the Astros making this a race here over the last couple of weeks, maybe it puts just a little more pressure on that front office to go and be aggressive on something that if they had an 8-9 game lead, maybe they'd be like, I think we can do less here and save some talent down the road. So we'll see. But yeah, I do think that I don't think the Astros are going to make a huge move at the deadline. I don't think they actually can, even if they wanted to. But they're absolutely going to try and add, right? And you have to add 2, but I still think you're a better team than Houston. So, yeah, I think on August, or I guess the deadline's on July 30. On July 31, we'll look at this and we'll be like, oh, the gap between the Mariners and the Astros talent-wise got bigger.
Well, because you have a significantly better farm system, right? The Astros have one of the worst farm systems in baseball. You have arguably the second best farm system in baseball behind the Orioles. So that gives you a significant leg up in the trade market. And just your ceiling is a lot higher as a ball club right now than they are. One, because you can theoretically add significantly more impact than they can, but also because your pitching staff is significantly better. And look at who's not producing for you right now. What if those guys actually start producing? Like, what if Julio does figure it out? Like, that significantly changes you. Like, the fact that you've been able to win as many games as you have in spite of all of those things is, one, it's scary and it makes you worry about the sustainability of things, of course. But the other way that you can look at it is, wow, if this, if a couple things go in the Mariners' direction eventually, like, this can really pop off. All right. Last question of the day from Darren McCacken Enjoyer. How about a fun question? Depending on when he retires, is Mitch Haniger a Mariners Hall of Famer? His career is so split into two and has been plagued with freak injuries. How much does 2018 and 2021 impact, as well as his missing time? We love Ty and Colby. Not Darren McCacken. Ty and Colby. Is
Raul Ibanez a Mariners Hall of Famer?
Probably should be.
But is he?
No.
Is Mike Cameron a Mariners Hall of Famer?
He should be.
But is he?
Yeah. I don't think you can justify it until you get those guys in and until you get Kyle Seager in.
Yeah. Having two, just because you've been here for 6 years, if you only have 2 great years out of the 6 or 7 you're here, it's just not a Mariner Hall of Famer to me. Now, ultimately, do I care? No.
I'd be fine with it. Fine with it.
It's a team Hall of Fame. Put whoever you want in it. Like,
Mitch was at the forefront of a very important time in Mariners history.
Sure,
so I totally get it if they wanted to do
Adam
it.
Frazier had one of the biggest hits in Mariners history. Should he be in the Mariners Hall of Fame for that? No.
But Haniger's impact, his importance in this organization's lore goes beyond what he did on the field, of course, as well. And I think that has to be taken into account here.
Is he more deserving than Nelson Cruz, than Mike Cameron?
No.
Than Raul Ibanez?
Yeah. Those guys would have to get in first before you could justify putting Mitch Haniger in. Absolutely. Yeah. But if they did it, if that happened, they put all those guys in, and then they put Mitch in. Yeah, 100%. I'm totally fine with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love Mitch. Yeah. I just, to me, is the one of the best players in franchise history, which is, I think, what the Hall of Fame should be. Your team Hall of Fame should be. No. Is he one of the most important? Still no, but he's certainly more important than he is like good at baseball, if that makes sense. But to me, the answer is no. He's not a Mariner Hall of Famer. Especially as long as guys like Cruz and Cameron and Ibanez aren't in yet. And as we always say, Rick Riz.
And that's going to do it for our show. But before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty and Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dane Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.